All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. I want to welcome you to Marriage and Family class. I'm hoping that the video lectures, podcast, whatever we call these, don't take too terribly long, but there are a couple of things I want to point out. The first thing is you really do need to be reading the text and coming up with questions, because I'm not going to try and just walk through the text explaining everything. So think of these videos as supplemental. You still have to read, you still have to talk, you still have to, discuss in the class site. Okay, as you may have noticed, I didn't actually put a discussion question in for this very first week, and the reason is mostly I wanted you guys to introduce yourselves to each other, and I wanted to see what you pulled out of the reading to actually talk about. Okay, now what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about today is the things that I get out of this very first chapter. The first chapter is an overview of all sorts of things, and if anything, it gets to be a little bit scattered. So if you look at the text when you're reading, you're going to notice there's a whole lot of focus on how families have changed, what the definitions of families are, and yeah, so that I can't overstate how important that is, because when you think about families, it's very easy to think of the family you have or the families we have right now and imagine that somehow that's the average or the default, and the truth is it's not. There's all different ways to set up families, and that's influenced by culture, it's influenced by economics, it's influenced by history. So the kind of families that people had 300 years ago before the Industrial Revolution, or the kind of families that pastoralists in Asia have, are going to be different than the kinds of families that industrial people living in the United States have, right? So there really isn't a set form of family. The book gives us a definition that at its base is, either people are blood, kin, or are married, right? The problem with that is that at its basis that works, but as soon as you start investigating or looking into families, you start to recognize that they're all that people choose folks to also include in their families. Okay. Now, more than just the definition and the fact that they've changed, the fact is families are also changing now going into the future. Not only have families changed historically and culture to culture, but if we were to go back 40 years ago, the average American family is going to be very different than the average American family now. And that's really where my interests lie, more than historically. I'm curious what's going on and where we're going. All right, now the book also mentions some theories, and I want to say just a little bit before we get into some of the different theories, and I'm certainly not going to discuss all the theories, but one of the standout issues in sociology, or one of the facts of sociology, is that the kind of theories we talk about in Intro and Social Problems, essentially functionalist conflict and symbolic interaction, those are really old theories, and contemporary sociology doesn't work on a straight functionalist perspective or a straight conflict perspective, or a straight symbolic interaction perspective. Those are introductory theories that are, some of them are 100 years old, and you can see that in the way that the book presents the theories for marriages and the family. Yes, it gives us a functionalist and a conflict spin on family, but then when the author starts getting into social exchange and ecologic and systems theories, you'll notice those are quite a bit more nuanced and actually have little elements of the larger older theories mixed up in them. All right, so let me start a little bit with the functionalist perspective. If we go back to Parsons, which I do believe the book mentions, if you go back to Parsons, who was writing in the, I don't know, let's say 40s and 50s, the thinking about families at the time was trying to answer the question of how does it work here. And if you pay attention to sort of a stereotypical family, obviously it stands out that on average the dad goes out, makes a living, and especially we're considering the 40s, right? That the mom stays home, takes care of the house and the kids. And so when functionalists looked at this, they saw this division of labor and surmised that what this division of labor is doing is meeting these needs that society has. What needs might society have that families fulfill? Well, first of all, it might need, well, not it might, a society has to have a way to deal with sexual energy, and family relationships are, right, sexual relationships. You also have to have a way to deal with kids, especially if people are going to be having sex. But not only do you have to have a way to deal with kids, from a larger society perspective, society doesn't go forward unless you train a new generation, right? So it's not just that people are having children, but that from a societal perspective, you're building the next generation of society. And we all need for society to do that smoothly. Also, so there's the raising, the care, and training of new members of society. We also want there to be a certain amount of stability, and the old-time functionalists would have looked at the family as the basic building block of society, sort of the grassroots level where things first start getting put together. Now, the reason I brought up Parsons and some of the other family theorists of the 40s is they looked at the division of labor between the sexes. These guys would not have spent a lot of time worrying about the difference between sex and gender. They understood it, but it wasn't quite as disparate as it is today. They'd have looked at the sex/gender division of labor, and they would have said having the man take care of the outside world, that's called the instrumental role. Essentially, he's making money, he's making contracts, he's hopefully taking care of the bills, whatever guy work is. That's the instrumental work. And then the mom gets the expressive work. Her job is in many ways it's love. She has to have, well, A, she has to have the children, but B, then she's kind of expected to take care of them. She's expected to take care of the private space of the home, whereas the man is expected to take care of the public side of the family on the outside. So this, I'm going to write that down. Instrumental. That didn't work out at all. And expressive roles. Okay. One's public, one's private. One's making money and the other's making love. And so essentially, in this old-fashioned perspective, what a man brings to the table is a way to make a living, and what the woman brings to the table is a way to is love and expression. All right. Now, I think that works. The conflict perspective on family. Now, recall when we talked about when you've taken intro or social problems, if you talk about conflict perspective, you have to talk about Marx as one of the first places for the conflict theory to pop up. And indeed, one of Marx's in Engels' books does point out that at least from a Marxist perspective, the exploitation of women is in fact the first layer of exploitation in an exploitative society. Okay, so what does he mean by that? Well, if you go back to those instrumental and expressive roles, it's very, when modern feminists talk about patriarchy, you can see that in the man holding the instrumental role. So if the man's the one making the money, and the man's the one whose name the house is in and the cars are in, and if the man's the one who is handling all of the business and the banking, and if we consider that women in the United States at least didn't even have the right to vote until the 20s, so the man's got the political expression as well. He's got all of the elements of public and financial power for the family in his hands. And what do women get? Well, in some societies, women weren't even allowed to own their own property, so they didn't have that. Even in a relationship with a nice man who takes care of her and loves her, she still is relying on him for the economics. She's relying on him for all of the legal stuff, and doesn't have much ability to go do any of that on her own. Now, at the same time, the trade-off is she's supposed to. So he provides the living, and the trade-off is she provides, I don't know, sex and babies. You'll notice that if she is providing sex and babies, that and he's the one who owns the property and the money, then she's actually providing him heirs to keep the property in his family. At the same time, all of that family work that she does in terms of taking care of babies, keeping house, whatever else, it's not remunerated financially. She doesn't get paid, she just gets taken care of. And if he doesn't take good care of her, she's sort of, SOL, right? She doesn't, there's not much recourse she actually has. You may not be aware of this, but in older marriage relationships or marriage contracts, there's actually an expectation that she's going to give him sex while he takes care of her. So, she's actually trading her sexuality, her family labor, her own children, all of this in with the trade being he'll take care of her and hopefully he'll be good to her. So a conflict perspective is going to always wonder who has the power, who has the advantage, and how are they working to take care of it. And if you take a critical eye on traditional families, there's an awful lot of that. If you were to argue against the conflict perspective, about the only thing you're going to be able to say, especially if we look at old-fashioned families, is that women hold power inside the household. And it's true. Many women absolutely did. But that was the only power that they necessarily actually had. And so if you ever wonder where a stereotype of women being passive-aggressive or manipulating comes from, well, it kind of makes sense if their only recourse to power in an old-fashioned family is personal power or persuasion or manipulation, because when it came to public power, actual economic and political power, that was all in the man's hands. Okay? Now, symbolic interaction. Symbolic interaction is always a little bit difficult to explain after functionalism and conflict theory, because the real question for symbolic interaction, as you'll recall from intro, is what does it actually mean? How do we build meaning in human life in conjunction with other humans, right? And so from a family perspective, clearly the longer time people spend together, the more they're going to create something of a shared reality. And then when you have children, and the children come up in that environment, their first understanding of any meaning at all is going to come from that particular family. That's a good way of looking at family. If you start to look at the different interactions and relationships that go along with that, they're let's see, the family exists in a social context with other families, and there's going to be a certain amount of meaning shared and developed between the family and its outside context, its outside environment. Yeah, so there you go. That's symbolic interaction. It doesn't, you can get to the macro structures that conflict and functionalism talk about, but it's a little bit longer. Symbolic interaction just ends up being more cultural, and we'll have time to talk about it. Now, if we move over here, on the right-hand side of your screen, I have the publisher PowerPoints, and I don't know what page this one is, but it's quite a bit in. So when I'm talking about families changing lots over here, that really is what most of the entire first half of the chapter is. So here we talked about structural functional with Parsons. Parsons is the one that gives us the instrumental and expressive. There's conflict, Marx, who's got the resources, what resources do they have, okay? Feminist theory is a spin on conflict theory. That's why I was using the example of contemporary feminism or people who talk about patriarchy. Yes, okay. The gender is socially constructed. Let me talk about that just for a moment, and then we'll get to some of the contemporary theories, I think. But so one of the things that's kind of intriguing once you realize it is that there's nothing that says women have to be nurturing and loving and men have to be aggressive go-getters. Some certainly are, maybe even most. I don't know if I can say that or not. But from the very beginning, when a child comes out and we choose a gender, we start layering our gendered expectations on that child from day one. There are some famous studies that talk about. There's some famous studies where they took brand new babies that are too young to tell what sex they are by their body, and if you take that baby and you put it up in traditionally pink clothes and give it to people, these studies are watching how the people are interacting with the pink babies, and they're cuddling the baby and cooing the baby and talking about how pretty and how nice and gentle, using very feminine, soft words. And the way they approach the baby is very loving and cuddling. And then when you take the baby and you dress that baby up in blue clothes, traditionally boy colors, and give the baby to groups of people, they're rougher with it. They don't cuddle it as much. They're bouncing the kid on their knees. They're using words like big and strong. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is what seems really natural to us in terms of gender, with women being loving and men being aggressive and physical. It's actually almost impossible to pull apart the cultural versus the biological influences when in fact we find out what sex the baby is halfway through the pregnancy, and even start treating the baby in utero in gendered ways. When the baby is born and we immediately start treating it in masculine ways or feminine ways, that's going to change the environment in which that child develops. So the nature-nurture question ends up being really, really tricky with gender. Clearly there's room for both, but exactly what is nature and what is nurture isn't really clear. There are twin studies. There are studies on individuals who have been whatever the verb for trans is, transitioned from one to the other, and you just don't really get any clarity. There are some people who, clearly don't, their gender doesn't fit their sex, and there's a lot of focus on that right now. But there are also other people where, for different sorts of reasons, the child was transitioned as a baby. For instance, like if you have a botched circumcision, or a child that's born intersexed or hermaphrodite, and you pick, the parents just pick one, the surgeons build the parts, and then you treat the child a certain way. And in some of those situations it takes, and others it doesn't take. So that ends up being what it ends up showing us, that it's very, very difficult to pull apart nature versus nurture in terms of gender. But as far as sex is concerned, I think you guys know this. Sex is what's in your jeans or what's in your pants. It's your physical body. Gender is all of the social roles that go along with that. So in my other classes, I'll say, to make this case, I'll make the point that breastfeeding is sex because one needs breasts that produce milk. Nursing a child with a bottle is gender. If you think women should do that, there's no real reason. Anyone can hold a bottle, but most men are going to have trouble breastfeeding. The same thing goes with having the child. Bearing the child is sex. Only half of the species can do that, and you got to have a very specific biological build to have children. However, changing diapers, anyone can change diapers. You don't need a womb or testicles to change diapers. So as soon as we say that women are expected to be good with babies, that's gender. If we say women are the ones who actually physically can have babies, that's sex. And when you start looking at cross-cultural comparisons, there turns out to be kind of a lot of different understandings of masculinity and femininity across cultures and across time. It's very easy to look at our world and the several thousand people we know and try and draw a generalization and say that masculinity means this and femininity means this, and then to generalize more than we actually should from that. I wonder if there's anything else I want to say about sex and gender. I guess that works for now. We'll have a chance to talk about sex and gender all throughout the semester. Symbolic interaction. Goodness, this is straight out of intro texts. So the looking glass self is probably the easiest way to start thinking about symbolic interaction. At some point, we don't just do what we want to do. At some point in our development, we start doing what we do with the expectations that it's going to be judged by others. So when you roll out of bed in the morning and you put on whatever clothes are comfortable and right near the bed, those clothes may not be the clothes you decide to go out into the world in. Even though they might be the most comfortable clothes you have, before you're going to go to Target or Walmart shopping, you want to put on something other than whatever sweatpants happen to be nearby, right? You might want to comb your hair, put on a baseball hat, because if you go out with your hair sticking all up funny like you just rolled out of bed, you're not going to look good. So what does this mean in terms of the looking glass self? Well, our sense of self develops when we are able to judge ourselves as if we were somebody else. So when I look in the mirror, the looking glass, and I see that guy looking back at me, I'm not looking at him like Mike judging Mike. I'm looking at him as someone in the outside world judging Mike, and I'm trying to gauge the outside world's reaction to that guy looking in the mirror. That's why you put on nice clothes for a first date. That's why you put on a suit for your job interview, because you are trying to manipulate, or you're trying to impress or affect others' judgments of you in that first interaction. That's why you put on decent jeans to go to Target instead of your just rolled out of bed sweatpants. Okay. Self, I don't think that's kind of layered into what we're expecting there. Roles. So one of the things that one of the things that ends up in symbolic interactions wheelhouse is this idea of roles. So since symbolic interaction is based on meaning and how we build meaning and play to meaning in society, one of the I don't know if I should call it a theory, but one of the ideas that falls under symbolic interaction is Goffman's dramaturgy. And dramaturgical analysis essentially looks at any given social situation and treats it as if it were a play, a drama. So consequently, when you enter into a social situation, you are playing a character. Right now, the character I'm playing is college professor. The character you're playing is student. We're not interacting in exactly the same way as we would if we were in a classroom, but I'm talking and you're listening and you're going to talk in the discussion boards. We understand the characters that we're supposed to play. Those characters have roles, expectations of behavior that go with each one of those. You can go quite a ways down this road. There are certain scripts which you're expected to adhere to when you interact with other people, and if you go off script, it kind of weirds people out. A great example of this is we're all very friendly here in the South. You see someone, you say, "Hey, how you doing?" or "How's it going?" or "What's up?" or a whole bunch of different ways of asking how someone is. But we don't actually care how that person is, do we? That's just the script for acknowledging another person you bump into. So when somebody says, "Hey, how are you doing?" and you respond back saying, "Man, I'm really stressed about money. My job's not paying enough, but I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't know how to get a job that pays more, and it's keeping me up at night, so I have a headache. And because I have a headache, I'm fighting with my partner, and so we haven't had sex in 3 months because we just hate each other." The person who asked, "How are you doing?" is just going to try and run away from you, because the script that you're supposed to follow is, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm okay. How are you?" Right? That's the script. That's how it's supposed to play out. And when you deviate from the script by actually telling the person how you are, that's going to cause problem. There are props that go with those roles. When all the country boys go out and feel like they have to buy a pickup because a pickup is what a man drives in, that pickup is a prop to masculinity here in the South. When a college professor carries a leather briefcase around, even though given his or her salary they can't really afford it, and they don't even carry anything in it, they just carry it around, that briefcase there is a prop, right? You come to physical class and you get out your notebook and your pens, and I watch what you guys are doing. Some of you are taking notes, some of you are just drawing doodlies. Even though you're just drawing doodlies, you wouldn't come to class without the paper and pen, because those are the props you need, right? You need a notebook, you need a pen. If you don't bring them, it looks like you're not taking class seriously, even if you're just doodling while you're listening to the lecture. So that's dramaturgy, what I just gave you there, and it plays in with role here. Now, where did gender gender socially constructed there? Notice that gender are the social roles that go along with being male or female, right? So mother Mom is a role that you know how to play. Dad the provider is a role. Dad that roughhouses with the kids, that's a role. Those are gendered roles, right? There's a lot more we can do with that. Maybe we'll have time as we go through. All right. This is just brutal, but it's everything I just said, and then some more. Aren't these awesome, these tiny little things? If you guys have any questions about what we're talking about here, please put it in the discussion, and I can either answer them through more lectures like this or in the discussion boards. Now, here's where, so remember how I started saying, conflict, functional, and symbolic interaction are kind of old-fashioned theories that we don't necessarily use exactly how we present them in today's world. The theories going here on out are theories that are more contemporary. They're also a little bit more nuanced, and you can actually see how these theories are sort of related to one another. So ecological theory points out that essentially families don't happen in a vacuum, right? The family is its own ecologic unit, and for everyone who's in the family, there's a give and take that goes with that. And then as you, and here the example is the child, but as you go through life, you start to deal with a larger and larger ecosystem. But a fundamental component of ecosystems is that they're all tightly knit together with an awful lot of connections. So, the people in the family have relationships with each other, and but then they also have relationships with people in the outside world. They have relationships with the institutions of the outside world, the churches, the governments, the places of work for the parents. That's in essence what they're getting at with the ecologic theory. Now, ecological theory here is going to be fairly closely, at least in my opinion, related to family systems theory. But let's go up here to social exchange theory, because social exchange theory emanates from functionalism, but it's not the same as functionalism. Essentially, social exchange theory looks at all social interactions as two parties or more who are essentially trading things. So if I have a friend I like to hang out with, I'm hanging out with that person because I enjoy hanging out with that person. If you pay attention to how much we spend on each other financially, it's probably going to be pretty close, right? So if we go to lunch and I don't have any money, my friend will pay, right? But then that also means sometimes I'll pay for that friend. Nobody's sitting around tallying up how much we're spending on each other. It's simply an impression that the different people have of whether or not they feel obliged or obligated to another person. I'll hold the door for the friend will hold the door for me, and it doesn't have to be a one-to-one. I bought lunch once, you bought lunch once. It can also be, you could have a situation, if you had a group of friends and one person was a total mooch, never had any money, so everybody else always had to pay for the person, but the person was the funniest person in the group that always made everybody laugh, then the social exchange theorist is going to say the reason the group keeps that person around is because, the economic value that everybody else is spending on him or her is made up for in the entertainment value that that person brings to the table for the group, if that makes sense. Now, if we want to apply this to families, now think of that old-fashioned thing that I was saying about men having the instrumental role and women having the expressive role. Essentially, if you take an exchange theory perspective and overlay it with that old-fashioned understanding of family, you'll notice that the woman is bringing her sex and sexuality, right? Because she's got to A, have sex, B, make babies, C, take care of babies, and then provide love for everybody. And what she's exchanging that for is making a living. What the traditional man is bringing is his ability to make a living, the housing he can provide, the type of life he can provide, how much money he can provide for his family to spend, to enjoy. And what he's getting out of that is someone to love, someone to shag up with once in a while, and someone to, carry on, someone to make him babies. Okay? So a traditional relationship is one where each person brings something different to the table that the other person can't necessarily provide, right? So in exchange, it ends up being, sort of fair. Now, what's interesting to think about this is it's easy to see in an old-fashioned family. So he brings the living and she brings the love, or she brings the family. But in today's world, where gender ideas are changing as quickly as they are, what are the different family members actually bringing to the table? If mom can make $75,000 a year, then what does she actually need from dad, right? What does the man bring to the table? Are men going to have to start bringing, things like nurturing? I don't really know. That's a question that plays into this social exchange theory. Now, when you start looking at, actually, let's go down here to the comparison level of alternatives. When somebody gets first wived, right? So a woman stays with a guy, he goes to med school and then plastic surgery school and ends up making all this money on the other side. He'll sometimes get a new wife, right? He wants somebody else. Well, why is he actually doing that? Well, the reason is, especially if we're looking at this in terms of social exchange theory, is there's a real difference between someone who's a college graduate, who's fun to hang out with, who can maybe make $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year as a young man, and someone who 10 years later can make $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 a year as a plastic surgeon, right? His market value has changed so much that what he brings to the table has grown while hers hasn't. Now, we all know this is completely unfair because his market value wouldn't have grown if she hadn't helped him get through med school and plastic surgery school. But the end result is his value is enough that he feels like he can go find someone more beautiful, someone younger, somebody that 10 years later he decides he likes new. Now, that sort of sucks for her, but if her value didn't go up the way his did, she's at a serious disadvantage, right? They're not equal trading partners anymore. Yeah. Okay. Now, family systems theory. This is kind of an eco-level analysis as well. And if you pay attention, you'll notice there's room for exchange and functionalism in this. There's room for economic or ecosystem level analysis in this, and there's room for power and conflict in this. So essentially, family systems theory treats families as if they are like it says, an ecosystem, an eco-web. And so inside the family, one relationship is between the parents, right? And then if the parents have a couple of kids, then there's also a relationship between the children, and there's a relationship between each child and the parents. And if you're in a blended family, then you have relationships that bring in step parents and step brothers and sisters and step children, that bring in exes and old moms and old dads. And like an ecosystem, any change to any one of those relationships is going to pluck that string that is that relationship, and it's going to reverberate through the rest of the family, right? And so when something changes, like when one of the kids goes off to college, then the whole rest of the ecosystem that family is involved in is going to have to change a little bit. That changes how the kids who are left behind relate to each other. It changes how the kids who are left behind relate to the parents. It changes how the parents relate to the kid who moved out and went to college. And well, hopefully that makes sense. And so on. Now, not only that, notice that the family is just one unit inside the larger unit. The larger unit is the institutions and the society around that family. So if someone in the family gets a new job and makes a whole lot more money, well, making more money is going to change the dynamics of how that family deals with each other. A job is going to change schedules and travel and power relationships within that family. But not only that, that job may change how, and that changed income may change how the neighbors interact with that particular individual. Or maybe the family moves to a new subdivision, a more expensive subdivision. That changes how people are going to deal with them. So it ends up being kind of a nice way to think about things. It's pretty complex, but then families are complex. And if you think about the families you know, just off the top of my head, if someone commits suicide, that creates a hole in that family, and the whole rest of the family has to deal with that, has to adjust if they're going to continue as well-adjusted adults. Families that have addiction or alcohol or some other sort of problems, they'll have, not only do they have a member who's unhealthy in an addictive sort of sense, they also have all sorts of codependencies that have to get built into their enabling relationships that have to get dealt with. So consequently, and you see this theory in counseling a lot, consequently just getting the person off of whatever it is that they're addicted to isn't really going to solve the whole problem, right? You have to look at the family as a whole. So you have to look at who the enabler is and who the codependent are and why are they enabling someone to behave unfortunately, because if you don't fix that, they may end up encouraging the person to go back to their old unacceptable ways. And so consequently, any understanding of what's going on in a family systems approach, you're going to have to draw boundaries that you recognize are a little bit artificial. If you're looking at the relationship between some of the children, you recognize that temporarily you're bracketing off that relationship so you can see what's going on with the kids, but you know that those brackets are false and that what's going on with those kids is also influenced by what's going on in the rest of the family and in the outside world. Okay. Whatever, let's, I don't know about family career, but let's go to biosocial theory. So these biosocial theories are theories that are going to be influenced by, well, like your biology, right? I find these to be sometimes a little bit problematic because it's very easy to look at our world, our culture, and then hypothesize an evolutionary reason for it. And voila, we have a biosocial theory, but we don't necessarily know that that's 100% correct. So in our world, there's a pretty big taboo against having sexual interactions with your first cousins. Now, we know that if you have enough first cousin relationships in a family, there's a higher risk for genetic abnormalities of the offspring of those relationships. But the thing is, there are a lot of places in the world where first cousin relationships are not frowned upon, right? And so it's easy to look at this genetic result, look at our culture, and say, see, there's a biosocial relationship. But the fact of the matter is, if we step back and look, other cultures don't necessarily have that taboo. Other worlds don't necessarily have that taboo. So it may just be entirely coincidental that we have a first cousin taboo, and that there are genetic, potentially negative genetic outcomes. I hope that that makes a certain amount of sense. Now, the examples that they give here, nepotism, reciprocity, and coercion. So essentially what these guys are going to say using these theories, of course, think about how you treat your children versus other people's children in an environment. If you're on the Titanic and the Titanic is going down, you're going to take your kid and you're going to put your kid in a lifeboat. And if it means you have to throw somebody else's kid, push someone else's kid out of the way so that your kid can get on the lifeboat, you're going to do it. Now, why are you going to do this? Well, according to this, you're going to do it because you are driven by, the survival instinct of your genetics, I don't know what else to call it, to make sure that your gene stream gets carried on. If everyone's going to die except for a few people, you want to make sure that your offspring are some of the ones who survive, right? Now, not only that, when you start to think about how it is you help people in the world, if you know how to get someone a job, who are you going to help? Well, you're going to help your sister, your brother, your niece, your nephew, your kids. You're going to help people who are closer to you. And again, this is going to come from the idea that evolutionarily, we want our genes to survive. It's not built into this, but you could also throw in the same idea for cultural evolution. It makes us sad when other cultures get shrunk or genocided, but we deal with it by shrugging our shoulders. However, the idea that our culture might shrink or suffer from genocide is absolutely terrifying, because, right, we want our culture to survive just like we want our genes to survive. Hopefully that makes a certain amount of sense. Again, the biotheories don't necessarily fly that well in sociology for exactly the reasons I was saying. It's very easy to take our culture and assign these biologic ideas to it and then think we have the right answer. Now, if you think about a great example of this is jumping right back to gender. It's so patently obvious that since women are the ones to have the kids, that they should take care of the kids, and since men tend to be bigger and stronger, that they should be the ones out killing things and making a living. It's very easy for us to look at these apparently self-evident facts and then say, in fact, this is the way biology would have it. And, it may or may not be true. But it's easy to say, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that it is true because it seems apparent and it fits this apparent biologic pattern. But we really don't know this until we start doing cross-cultural comparisons, or even, comparisons to, I don't know, monkeys or something, other animals, because that's how we're going to cut through culture and get to the biology. And most of us don't do that when we're hypothesizing about biologic and evolutionary theories. All right, actually, I don't want to talk about this page. So hopefully this wasn't too long. How long was it? We'll see what Camtasia says. Nope, not there. Oh, 49 minutes. I'm sorry, that was long. All right, but at any rate, there you go. We have a little bit of introduction, a little bit of theory, and as the course goes forward, hopefully we can get a deeper understanding of these theories. And most of what the course is going to be about are changes in families as we go forth. All right, thank you very much. I'm totally looking forward to this class and this semester, and have a good weekend.